So I have a very old book here. This is the first really old book that I ever got. And this book is actually from 1559. So you have to think about this book actually survived a lot of different wars on this planet. It survived the Revolutionary War, even older than that. It was before Sir Isaac Newton. This was way back during the Protestant Reformation. This book is actually in exquisite condition for the age that it is in. The binding is still completely intact. You can still open it just fine. To really have something that is this good quality with still good leather on it is amazing. This specific book is a Decretum Gratiani. Gratian is the guy who wrote this book, or helped compile it, I should say. He was a Catholic monk, but he was more of a lawyer than anything, and he basically compiled this Decretum. Decretum in Latin is decree, so these are different decrees by the Catholic Church. And it's still quite legible, still easy to read through. The pages have yellowed with time, but it's still there. What's interesting is in an old book like this, occasionally, if you look right there in that page, I don't know if you can see it, there's actually holes in the page. And so you would have bookworms that would come and try and eat the pages, and they would form holes. And there's just a couple of them through this book. It's really in pretty good condition. The only page that is a little bit delicate is this first cover page right here. Let's see if you can see that on the screen okay. So why? Why buy an old book that cost a bunch of money to get, that has been sitting on a shelf for over 450 years, and why am I holding it? Well, this book contained a lot of interesting things that we have commentary about from the Protestant Reformation. So what's interesting is to read some of the statements, and I have some notes here on what exactly this says. Now, this book is written in Latin, so you have to translate it, or you can speak Latin. But if you go to page 53 in this book, it has something interesting that it says. It says, if I can turn there, that these, and if you translate it to English, it says that these decretal epistles were to be co-enumerated with canonical scripture. And so what does that mean? Well, co-enumerated basically means on the same plane. So you had scripture, and then you had this book right next to each other. And that would be a problem for a lot of Protestants, because Protestants would say, no, we believe in scripture alone. You know, we're not going to take a bunch of writings from somebody else and put it on the same plane as scripture. If you skip forward to page 131 of this work, right here, which you won't be able to see it up close, it has something interesting that it says about the Pope. If you have the English translation, which I do, here on my computer, it says, if the Pope should be found negligent, deficient, and should otherwise lead innumerable people to hell, with himself to be bound there with plagues for eternity, no man may judge him, for he is to judge all, and no man him. And you can actually read that right here in this text, and it uses the term Gehenna when it's referring to hell. And, you know, that would say that the Pope is essentially above everyone else, right? Where does that place his position? What does that say about him? Again, Protestants would take issue with that. If you flip forward to page 314, it says something else that's interesting. It says, it is quite clearly shown that the pontiff cannot be bound by the secular power, which is evidently called a god by the pious Prince Constantine, since it is evident that even a god cannot be judged by men. And so a lot of people would say, wait a second, you're using the term God in reference to the Pope. And the Pope is not God. And there's only one God. And so to put a man, a sinful man, on the same plane as God is blasphemy, a lot of people would say. And I would have to agree. If you flip further, one page over, on page 316, there's actually a section of text that made its way into this book from the donation of Constantine. Now, the donation of Constantine was basically a decree that was supposedly from Constantine, giving the papal power more power, essentially. It was later proved to be a forgery. It came out hundreds of years before this book did. It was later proved to be a forgery. However, it was still put in this book of canon law and co-enumerated with canonical scripture to be on the same plane as scripture, even though it turned out to be a forgery. And one of the things it talks about is it talked about Peter, and they believed that Peter was the first pope, and then they believe that every pope after Peter has basically occupied the same position. And it has a phrase here that it uses to refer to the first pope and subsequent popes thereafter. And the phrase is vicarius filii Dei. And this phrase, vicarius filii Dei, has been used as a title for the pope for hundreds of years. There's many different occurrences of it being used. And the issue with that is that a lot of Protestants over the years, for hundreds of years, took that title and they turned to Revelation. And they turned to Revelation 13, verse 18, that talks about the 666 power, the Antichrist power. And, Revelation tells you to count the number of the name. And so they would say, okay, well, let's take the Pope's name, vicarius filii Dei, the title for the Pope, and add up the Roman numerals. And what number do you get? Well, vicarius filii Dei, it does indeed add up to 666. And they would say, see, the Pope is Antichrist. And that's not a unknown thing to do with Roman numerals, because Roman numerals were very prevalent. If you flip back to the cover page right here, where it has the date that this book was printed, if you look down there, it gives the date in Roman numerals. That's how they counted things. And so if you use the title vicarius filii Dei and add it up, sure enough, you get 666. If you go further on to page 870, flipping forward in this book, one thing that strikes me as I turn these pages is the smell. It smells like a really, really old book. It's kind of interesting. But on page 870, it says, when I read again on my computer the English translation, because I don't read Latin, but you can translate it online. You can actually get this whole book in digital form online and look it up and find the actual English translation to it right there, so you can see exactly what it says. Page 870, it says, enemies of the ecclesiastical religion must be coerced by arms. And this was actually by Pope Gregory XIII that said this. Now, the problem with that is that you're dealing with coercion, right? You're coercing people into believing the way you want them to believe. And that's what Protestants took issue with when you're coercing people by arms. Incidentally, that's the same Pope that a few years after this book was published minted a coin celebrating St. Bartholomew's Massacre, which I have another video about. I actually have that coin, one of the restrikes of that coin from the 1600s. And so he was essentially celebrating the fact that they killed tens of thousands of Protestants, Huguenots, that were in France at the time. And so you see elements of coercion in this, and That's why you had birthing of the French Revolution, because people got tired of the coercion of the state, and that's one of the reasons you had the French Revolution. If you go forward from there, there's actually a last section on page 1297. And on 1297, if I flip there, there's another section of text, and it's actually talking about the Sabbath, which I find interesting. And it's specifically a commentary about those who try to get people to keep the Sabbath. It says, Gregory, servant of the servants of God, to his most beloved sons, the Roman citizens, it has come to my ears that certain men of perverse spirit have sown among you some things that are wrong and opposed to the holy faith, so as to forbid any work being done on the Sabbath day. What else can I call these but preachers of Antichrist, who, when he comes, will cause the Sabbath day as well as the Lord's day to be kept free from all work? For because he pretends to die and rise again, he wishes the Lord's day to be had in reverence, and because he compels the people to Judaize, that he may bring back the outward right of the law and subject the perfidy of the Jews to himself, he wishes the Sabbath to be observed. So you essentially have the Catholic Church at the time calling those that kept the Bible Sabbath, which there's no scripture text to prove otherwise that we shouldn't be keeping it, Antichrist, for following the Ten Commandments. And so this was another issue that Protestants had issue with at that same time. And so that's some of the stuff we found thus far. I am sure as we continue to do research, we're going to find more interesting tidbits that this book has to give up. Sometimes it's a little difficult to crack its secrets because, again, it is written in Latin and you have to look up the translation and you have to do a optical character recognition image search through the document, and that works some of the time, and you have to find it and then make sure that what you're reading is accurate, make sure you got the right page and find that exact page in this, and so it takes time. There's a lot of pages in here to look at, and we're just really blessed to have a book that is in such good condition, that is one side of two opposing paradigms and how they relate to Protestant history and current history.